Hey guys, it's Sarah, and today I bring to you my March and April wrap-up.
For any of you who've noticed this piece of lint on my shirt, I also wish it wasn't there, but it is, and we just have to deal with it.
This has been a weird year. Apparently, I do 2-month wrap-ups together now because I did that for January and February as well. But I kind of have a reason for why I did it like this. I did a special reading challenge where I read some of the worst rated books on Goodreads. I've actually already posted that video if you want to check it out. And I had to read 4 books for that challenge, so it kind of ended up spanning more than a month, and I didn't really want to talk about my wrap-up before I talked about those books, and so I decided to postpone and then just do these 2 months together. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave the link down below. Aside from those books, I really enjoyed a lot of the books that I read in March and April, so let's just get into that wrap-up. So the first book that I finished was Darkfever by Karen Marie Moning. This is what I would describe as like an urban fantasy sort of new adult book that centers around this girl named Michaela, whose sister has gone off to Ireland to study abroad. Partway through her study abroad, she gets the call that her sister has died. There's a lot of mysterious circumstances surrounding her sister's death, and so she wants to go to Ireland and figure out what happened. And basically this is the first book in a series, and it's sort of like a fairy sort of series that deals with dark fae and light fae and all of that stuff. And so she goes to Ireland to kind of research what happened, and then she ends up being pulled into this world of fantasy. And yeah, that's pretty much the gist of this series. For me, this book was a lot of fun and it was a really quick read. I think the key to enjoying this is not taking it too seriously. I tend to be a more critical reader, so I sometimes have a hard time reading stuff like this, but for some reason I was okay with this. I was down for like the simplicity of the writing. There were a lot of dated references, like it talked a lot about like iPods and like really old platform sandals. It was just very like early 2000s, like the style and everything. But overall, I really liked this book. I think the main character Mac was very self-focused and a little bit vain. I think the point of her character is that she's gonna grow as the series goes on, because she was just really into her appearance, and she talked a lot about her nail polish and her clothes, and she like loved the color pink. But that didn't really annoy me because I kind of liked some of her sass, so I was like, I can deal with this character. She'll get better over time. I'm not really sold on the character Jericho yet, which is the man that's kind of helping Mac look into her sister's death. I don't really know what his deal is yet, but he's really mean and I don't really like him. I can tell that they're going to be planning a romance between Mac and Jericho, but I'm not like here for it yet. But I'm still really interested to see where this series goes. So if you're in the mood for something that you don't really have to think about, that can just entertain you, I definitely think this is a good series. And as far as the world building goes, I thought that the Fae element was actually pretty interesting. The next book I read was possibly one of my favorite books of all time. It was so amazing, and that was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Talor Jenkins Reid. This book centers around a woman named Evelyn Hugo, who is essentially a starlet from I think like the 50s and 60s. She was a very famous movie actress, kind of think like someone like Marilyn Monroe, and her life is very notorious because she was married 7 times and no one truly knows the motivations or anything about her. And so there is this journalist named Monique who gets called in to do an interview with Evelyn, and she doesn't really know why. And when she shows up, Evelyn tells her that they are going to be writing her biography and she wants to finally share her life. The story is told in a dual narrative of the present day, where Evelyn is talking to Monique, and then also Evelyn's life story as Evelyn tells it. Evelyn is not only a Cuban woman, but she's also bisexual. The way her life unfurls over time is just so empowering and amazing. Like, I love Evelyn so much. Like, she's literally the queen of my life. She's a very morally gray character, so you sometimes question whether or not you should be like agreeing with her, but I loved her so much that even when she did something wrong and a character got mad at her, I was like, Evelyn's always right, because Evelyn's perfect and she makes the choices she needs to make to get ahead in life. Everything she does is so cutthroat and so tactical to get to where she needs to be, and reading about her experiences are just so empowering. Like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, even though she has to make shady decisions, it's just like her journey is so beautiful to me, and I cried so much while reading this book. But I urge everyone to read it. It's so amazing. I don't really know what else I could say about this book. I'll have to collect my thoughts and talk about it another time, but it was just so good. Third book on my list is Daughter of the Burning City by Amanda Foody. Unfortunately, I did not like this book as much as the previous 2 I just mentioned. I think I gave this about 2 stars. I really went into this book wanting to like it because I think the concept is so interesting. It centers around this girl named Serena, who is what they call an illusion worker. And so she has the power to create illusions, which are basically people and characters and like monsters that kind of just like come out of her brain, and they're sort of an illusion that people see. And so she is with this traveling circus called Gomorrah. Her illusions are sort of like her family, but she doesn't think they're actually real people because they came out of her head. You can touch them, you can interact with them, they seem very real. Like I said, she doesn't really consider them to be real until one day one of them gets murdered. And so it sort of turns into a murder mystery, and her trying to figure out why her illusions can be murdered and how she just thought they were from her head, so on and so so forth. It's kind of confusing and messy to explain, but I also feel like the world building in this book was messy and confusing. So that's all I can really say. There's not really an explanation for this magic system about why people are allowed to do the things they can do, because other people in the book have other powers. So the traveling circus itself is split into parts. So there's the uphill and the downhill. And what was really confusing about this was like, were they like on a literal hill? And then like when they travel from town to town doing their circus, they sometimes go to a place called the Up Mountain, which is where like a lot of these very religious people live who kind of shun the circus. I'm having a hard time explaining this book because the plot was kind of hard to understand in that way. I guess I'll just break this down into the things I liked and the things I didn't like. So for the things I did like, I thought that the ideas had a lot of potential. I think this whole concept of illusion working and like creating people from your mind and stuff was very cool. I even think a traveling circus is a really cool idea, and I love the idea of a murder mystery like in a fantasy setting. I also really liked the diversity in this book. The main character is bisexual, and her love interest, I believe, is on the ace spectrum, kind of described as being demisexual. And then one of the side characters is a lesbian. So the list of things I didn't like about this book is unfortunately a little bit longer. Number one being, I didn't like the main character, Serena. I found her to be very like frantic and hysterical, but her thoughts were always constantly like frazzled, and she was always like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? Everything's terrible. I'm gonna die. Everybody's gonna die. I'm so upset. Like that's just kind of like, not verbatim what she thought, but like it was just constantly like negative, and like she just like didn't know what to do, and it was just like, for me, the only interesting thing about her was that she could create illusions, which, like I said, was not very well explained. And also, she had no eyes. She was blind. Like, she literally was born without eyes. So that was interesting. It also wasn't explained how she was able to see without having eyes. But again, like, cool. The second thing I didn't like was just that there was too many characters in general. Serena had created a lot of illusions to be part of, like, her illusion family. And there were just so many of them. And they were not different enough for me to keep track of. Like, their descriptions were mentioned once. And then I was just supposed to kind of like know what their names were, but I didn't know who was who, and so I had a hard time following along, and there was a couple of her female illusions that were just too similar. And then the last thing that I didn't really like about this book was that the mystery was pretty basic. Obviously the murder mystery was a big draw to why I read this book, because I really liked that idea of a murder mystery in a fantasy, and it was just really basic. Like I kind of guessed who was the culprit like pretty early on. Like I didn't guess like every little nuance of the mystery, but it was pretty glaringly obvious, at least to me as a reader, what was going on. So I was just not very surprised. And so yeah, I will say that overall, I'm not going to count this against Amanda Foody. I just didn't like this book, but I know she recently wrote another book, and I will give it a go because I know Emma from Emma Books loves this author and loved this book, and I just trust her. So I'm going to try the second book. Hopefully I'll enjoy it maybe a little bit more than this one, but overall this was a dud for me. Gave it 2 stars. Just not a fan. The next book on my list is Echo by Pam Muñoz Ryan. I really enjoyed this book. As some of you may know, I've been delving more into middle grade lately. I read Nevermore in my last wrap up, and that's now one of my favorite books of all time. And I'm starting to realize that I really enjoy middle grade. I think it's so pure and it makes me really happy, and I just am having a lot of fun reading it. And so I got this recommendation from Monica from She Might Be Monica and a few other people, and so I decided to pick it up. I definitely recommend picking it up on audiobook because there's multiple narrators, and it's a book that's heavily influenced by music, and they play music throughout the audiobook. So the majority of this book follows the lives of 3 different children, one of them being a boy named Friedrich in Germany right before World War II, another being a boy named Mike, I think in the early 40s, and then a girl named Ivy right as World War II is really ramping up. What connects these 3 characters is that through a series of events, they all somehow end up with the same harmonica throughout time. This harmonica sort of has some sort of like magical property to it. I don't really know how to describe it because it's not really a magical book, but you kind of get the feeling that the harmonica is magic because as each of these kids get it, it's at a very crucial time in their life, and it really helps them to have this harmonica, and it kind of just helps fuel their love for music. What I really liked about this book is that it talks about a very crucial time in history. It teaches you a lot about how Germany kind of started ramping up with Hitler and getting into World War II. And then the second character, Mike, is an orphan, and it's about him and his little brother getting being adopted. And then Ivy has a brother that's actually in the military during World War II. And so it kind of just like follows these different things. And also Ivy's story deals with Japanese internment because her family is Hispanic and they take over a farm for a Japanese family that's been put in an internment camp because of World War II. And so I think it's just like, if you were a very young reader with this book, it would teach you a lot about these different things in a very basic way, kind of like reading that's fun but also educational. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. I will say that the writing style is pretty young. I feel like it's geared towards kids who are probably between the ages of like 8 and 12, but it's just so adorable and the characters are all super cute. Another thing that annoyed me about this book, again, I'm an adult reading this, so it's probably not for me to judge. Each story stops at a very crucial point. Like we're reading about Friedrich in Germany and it's kind of ramping up and you're like, oh my gosh, I actually didn't even really know a lot about this book when I went into reading it. So I didn't know it followed multiple children. And so I was all like in love with Friedrich, ready to like be in his story. And then at a very crucial moment, it was just like, and here we are, Mike, totally different year in America. And I was like, so offended. And then I started like falling in love with Mike and his little brother and I was like, okay, I can like get in with these orphans. And then again, at a very, very crucial moment, it cut off and I was just like, this is really rude. But overall, I really liked this book. It's definitely not my favorite middle grade of all the ones I've been reading, but I definitely gave it 4 stars because it was still really, really touching and I really enjoyed it. Next on our list is Blue Lily, Lily Blue by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the 3rd book in the Raven Cycle series. It has taken me a very long time to finish the series, not because I don't enjoy it, but just because like I didn't feel pressured to finish it. The story is very like languid and like rolling along, and there's something about this series that doesn't make me be like, oh my god, I have to finish this. It centers around this girl named Blue and a group of boys. Blue comes from a family of psychics and her whole life she's been told that if she kisses her true love, she will kill him. And in the beginning of the 1st book, she meets this group of boys that's from a very fancy private school, and as she befriends them, she discovers that they've been on this like long quest to find a long dead Welsh king. There's a lot of reasons about why they're looking for him. I can't really get into the details of this series because it's very weird and unlike anything I've read before, but that's kind of like the gist of it. What really propels this series, I think, is the characters. They're very complex. I really like the way that they're written, and I really enjoy the magic system in this book. I know I have bashed other books for being vague on the magic system, but I actually like that the magic system in this series is vague. It just like seeps into the story. There's not a lot of explanation for it. It just kind of exists and it is, and I don't really know a better way to explain that, but I really like that about it. It's very atmospheric and the writing is very good. I have mentioned previously that I didn't love all the characters in the first 2 books, but there was something about the 3rd book. It's like each book kind of centers around a different character. The 1st book was definitely Blue's book, the 2nd book was definitely more about Ronan, and this 3rd book was kind of Adam's book, and Adam was a character for me that I found to be quite annoying in the previous books, but something about the 3rd book just made me like really like Adam and feel for him and like want him to succeed in life, which is really, really random. And then I think the 4th book I would consider to be more like Gansey's book. But yeah, I just really, really enjoyed this 3rd book overall. I don't know what it was that like kind of switched gears for me, but it made me actually want to just go right into the 4th book and finally finish out the series. So it's really no surprise that the next book that I delved into reading was The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the 4th and final book in that series. I really, really enjoyed this as a conclusion. I know some people had issues with it because it doesn't really like answer all of your questions that you have. Like I said, the magic is very vague, the world is very vague, and so there's definitely going to still be questions that don't get answered as you finish out the series. But I kind of liked that about it. There's something about this series that almost feels like it's meant to be that way, like you're not meant to know everything. And I enjoyed this as a conclusion. I ended up really liking all of the characters. I'm excited to know now that Ronan is going to be getting his own book series because like I said, he really grew on me, and then Adam really grew on me as well, and I'm sure he's going to show up in the next series, and I really want to see more scenes between those 2 characters. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about the series besides that it's atmospheric, the writing is beautiful, the characters are very fleshed out and 3-dimensional, and it's a good time. If you haven't gotten into this series yet, I highly recommend it. And the next book that I read was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I saw Kristen from Super Space Chick recommend this book once. I think she said someone said you should read it if you like Rainbow Rowell. I don't really get that comparison, and I'm sorry, Kristen, if that wasn't you who said that. I don't know who said that, but I remember someone saying that once, that if you like Rainbow Rowell, you'd like this. I think that's a weird comparison because I think the writing is really different, but luckily I still really enjoyed this adult romance. The story centers around a girl named Lucy who is the assistant to a high-powered executive at a publishing house, and she works with this guy named Josh who's sort of her sworn enemy. He is also the assistant of another one of the executives, and they have to share an office, and they do not get along at all. They fight all the time. Everyone in the publishing house knows that they don't get along. They're kind of notorious for this, and HR has had many complaints about them. As you can guess, this book is a sort of like hate to love story, which I personally love. That's one of my favorite tropes. Something happens and Lucy and Josh are forced to kind of get to know each other, and then Lucy starts to realize that maybe everything she thought about Josh wasn't true. I thought this was a very fun contemporary. I was super into the characters and the writing, and I definitely will admit that I liked the first half way more than the second half. The second half kind of got really cheesy, and I didn't really love the conclusion, but overall I was all in for most of the book, and so I ended up giving this 3 stars because it kind of disappointed me towards the end, but overall super fun. I definitely want to look in to see if Sally Thorne has written any other books. If you have any recommendations for books similar to this or books that have that hate to love trope, please let me know. I absolutely love that. The next 4 books that I'm going to mention, I actually read interweaved with the other books that I've already talked about in this video, but they were the 4 books that I read for that Goodreads experiment, which is why I'm not really going to delve into them because I have a very long video regarding these books that you can watch. I will link that down below like I mentioned earlier. But that was The Almost Moon by Alice Sebold, Pygmy by Chuck Palahniuk, The Emperor's Children by Claire Massoud, and 4 Blondes by Candace Bushnell. So if any of those titles interest you or if you've heard of any of these books or authors, I recommend watching that video to see what I thought about them. But that pretty much concludes my March and April wrap up. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Also let me know what your favorite books were in March and April. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. You're all beautiful. Have a nice day.
Time passes, how I feel so low. Searching for bases, covering up the hole. I'll fight for your love.